Welcome back to News in Focus. Let's go to the story now. National Prosecuting Authority head Advocate Shamila Batohi will step down at the start of next year, and the search for a successor is already stirring controversy with regards to who will be the National Director of Public Prosecutions. Now, the panel members reportedly have limited legal experience, which has raised questions about their legitimacy. This comes at a time when the criminal justice system within South Africa is at an all-time low. If you're listening to the Madlanga Commission and seeing the infiltration within the South African Police Service, and when you listen to Advocate Batohi earlier on this year saying that the NPA is on some sort of quote-unquote life support machine. Joining me now to take this conversation further, I'd like to welcome Dr. Jean Redpath, who is a senior researcher at the Dullah Omar Institute. Dr. Redpath, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us here on News in Focus on Hilaal TV.
Thanks for having me.
Absolute pleasure. Dr. Redpath, for context for the viewers out there, whoever is going to be part of this panel for the NDPP, how important is it that there is someone with some sort of relevant legal experience, given the importance of this job?
So I would argue, and we have argued as the Dullah Omar Institute, that it is crucial to not only have legal experience, but prosecutorial experience. The job is really about managing prosecutors, setting up prosecuting policy, and intervening when policy is not complied with. And it's going to be incredibly difficult to judge the suitability of a candidate if the panel doesn't have insight into those aspects of the job. We as the Dullah Omar Institute have been campaigning for some time that the legislation around the appointment not only of the National Director of Public Prosecutions, but also those of the Directors of Public Prosecutions in the provinces, that legislation should actually determine the process and the composition of the panel that would recommend people to the President for appointment. We would recommend a system similar to that in Kenya, where there's a very clear process, a diverse panel, and then there's even a veto by the National Assembly if the National Assembly is not happy with the choice of the President.
Dr. Redpath, of course, Mamoloko Kupai is going to be leading this. She is the Minister of Justice and Constitutional Development. Just for the context of the viewers, the recommended panel would, of course, be Chris Nissen from the South African Human Rights Commission, Advocate Ntabiseng Sepanya Mukhale, who is the Commission for Gender Equality. She's the chairperson there. The Auditor General Tsakani Maluleki, the chairperson of the Public Service Commission, Professor Somadota Fikeni, a representative of the Black Lawyers Association, and a representative of the National Association of Democratic Lawyers. When looking at this panel, is it sufficient enough? Is it good enough in terms of having them as the panel? Again, criticisms around it not having someone with vast legal experience within it.
Yes, so the chair of the Gender Commission does have some legal experience, but she will obviously come from a particular angle and a particular viewpoint around gender. One would hope that she would not just be pushing for a female candidate and rather be looking for a candidate that can prosecute in a way that is favorable to women generally. But what is most notable about the composition of the panel is that when Advocate Batohi was appointed, there were, in fact, 5 organizations relating from the legal profession, including the Bar Association and the Law Society of South Africa, as well as another voluntary organization. Those have been completely omitted this time around. Now, the mission of the Law Society of South Africa and the Bar Association in particular is of some concern, as they would have brought quite a different perspective from the quite Chapter 9 heavy government-appointed profile of the panel otherwise.
Yeah, Dr. Redpath, you mentioned something of Chapter 9. I mean, when you look at, of course, the panel that's there, it does really have a Chapter 9 heavy supposed take on this panel. You mentioned the Bar Association. How important was it to have somebody from there, given again, and I know we're repeating this, the necessity to have someone with legal experience within the panel? Because again, this specific job is so important from a prosecutorial aspect of things.
So I don't think it's just legal experience. I think what the panel should be doing is affirming the choice from the broader legal fraternity's perspective. And so if you're leaving out the views of the broader legal fraternity, it raises some concerns and some questions, and it suggests that perhaps there is already a candidate in mind who perhaps might not meet the approval of the broader legal fraternity as represented by the Law Society and the Bar Association. So that is the concern. Part of the importance of having a transparent process is that people will believe that the best candidate is being chosen. Now, the change to the composition, unfortunately, undermines that somewhat. I'm not saying that the candidate that ultimately is chosen won't be a suitable candidate. What I am saying is that a more transparent process with a greater representativity of people outside of Chapter 9, who, if you recall, they are all appointed by the president in turn, it undermines the sort of acceptability by the broader legal fraternity for a player who will be absolutely crucial in the criminal justice system.
Dr. Redpath, before we go to the break, prosecutorial experience. This is where, of course, the NPA does its work. You know, it goes ahead and has that authority within the criminal justice system of this country. How important was it that this panel needed someone with that experience, given that when we look at recommendations that have been given to the NPA, it's found itself in a very difficult position to prosecute relevant individuals. And of course, we will touch on that in the next segment. But was there a trick missed by the president, his advisors, in having someone with that sense of experience from a prosecutor one?
Yes, so I think it's very tricky to have a current prosecutor or even a retired prosecutor on the panel, particularly because of perceptions around where that, given the politicization of our prosecution service and perceptions that might arise of where that person was in terms of that politicization. So we have to then look at how important is it actually for the person appointed to have that prosecutorial experience. And I think that is more important. On the panel, one would have hoped to have seen perhaps a retired judge or someone with the gravitas and the insights into the prosecutorial system to be able to judge whether a person is suitable.
After the break, I continue my conversation with Dr. Jean Redpath. The criminal justice system within the country, not many citizens, actually majority of the citizens, really don't have a trust or a sense of trust within it. How important is this selection for such an important role within the NPA and the NDPP going to be with regards to somehow restoring the trust with the public. My conversation with Dr. Redpath continues after the break. Welcome back to News in Focus. I'm still in conversation with Dr. Jean Redpath, who is a senior researcher at the Dullah Omar Institute. Again, Dr. Redpath, thank you so much for staying with us. Dr. Redpath, again, concerns have been raised when it comes to whoever the makeup of the MPA is going to be, that there is no political interference when it comes to that. Is that something that the Dullah Omar Institute shares in terms of how this selection is going to be?
So, I mean, obviously it is the president who appoints the national director. And so obviously it's an inherently political choice. What one doesn't want is interference in the work of the prosecuting authority once people are appointed. And it's not just the national director, but also the directors of public prosecutions in the divisions, which are equivalent to the provinces. So we would want a transparent process for all of those people so that the perceptions, at least of the public, is that this is not an obviously political animal that has been appointed to this position. This is a person who does have the skills, the ethical operation, so that in their position they will take decisions without fear, favor, or prejudice as required by the Constitution. So, I mean, in a sense, the president is a politician and he appoints, that's what the Constitution says, but we want that appointment to be a rational choice of an ethical, upstanding person who will do their work without fear, favor, or prejudice.
Dr. Redpath, when of course the selection is done, and of course the president, as you mentioned, is going to be, the final decision maker in all of this. Whoever takes this on, and I think both you and I will agree, is a poison chalice. If we are to, listen to what Advocate Batohi had said, that potentially we're on a supposed life support machine of the MPA. And this is down to the fact that when it comes to budgets, there haven't really been higher budgets that have been allocated to the NPA. And again, this is an arm of the criminal justice system. How does he or she, whoever it's going to be, really deal with this position, given what it is, given that you've got the State Capture Commission and recommendations there for prosecutions to occur? And we're talking about high-level prosecutions to occur. It's going to be tough, isn't it, Dr. Redpath, especially when
Absolutely.
It comes to this part of the criminal justice system?
Absolutely. And Advocate Batohi, a year or so ago, was campaigning strongly for changes to the law, which we support. We support the National Prosecuting Authority being financially independent of the Department of Justice. We support the idea that the national director can hire additional skills without having to go through the Minister of Justice and the Minister of Finance. And that is what we would like to have seen. At the moment, the only provision is Section 38 of the National Prosecuting Authority Act, which requires approval from both ministers. And in fact, we've heard that those applications for additional skills in particular cases have not been successful on occasion. And so it's a very cumbersome process. It's not always successful, and there isn't an allocated budget for additional skills in particular cases. And we would strongly advocate for changes to the legislation to permit that.
And again, therein lies the problem, doesn't it, Dr. Redpath, is that it makes the job for whoever the head of the MPA, whoever it's going to be, even more difficult. The fact that when you read that act, again, it requires someone senior, someone higher, to give the approval in terms of budgets. And some of these prosecutions needs to be done as soon as possible to show the public that there is a national prosecuting authority that can function effectively. But when you have this red tape, it makes things even more difficult.
Yes, and I think, one of the key problems for any national director is they don't appoint the directors of public prosecutions in the provinces. They are also appointed by the president, and the national director has very little control over what the directors of public prosecutions do. The national director's role is to set policy and to exert oversight over the directors of public prosecutions, and can only intervene when policy is not being followed. So it's not so easy for a national director to turn things around. Advocate Batohi wrote to President Ramaphosa 2 or 3 years ago to ask for the removal of the Gauteng Director of Public Prosecutions. And it took President Ramaphosa 2 years to take any action in that regard. And yet the data was showing great problems in Gauteng, our economic heartland. And so you can see, if you are the boss of something and you have no control over your next layer of management, it is extremely difficult to make real changes. And the next director of public prosecutions, national director, is going to have to look very closely at detailed policy and directives so that there is greater room to intervene when policy is not followed.
And then lies the problem, Dr. Redpath. As a South African citizen, yourself, myself, all we want is a criminal justice system that is working effectively. But if from a political perspective, and you've mentioned it, that a lot of this comes down to the political will, like you mentioned, going to the Minister of Finance, going to the Minister of Justice when it comes to budget approvals, writing to the President to have certain heads within the province removed due to non-compliance or alleged corruption. And if this is moving at a snail pace, the public are looking at the criminal justice system and saying, well, we just can't trust it anymore. And the stats don't lie. It's at an all-time low if you're taking 2021 statistics. And this is where we don't want to be as a country right now. When you look at the high levels of crime, not just blue-collar crime, but also that of white-collar. We just saw it last week when we looked at what happened with the Tembisa Hospital report by the Special Investigating Unit.
I agree entirely. It's not just the National Prosecuting Authority. It is the investigative agencies, the Hawks, the police. It's the way the courts are operating. And I think each part of the system has to start facing the reality of where they are failing. And one of the possible ways to relieve the burden on the National Prosecuting Authority is for them to start delegating the right to prosecute to other agencies, which is possible in terms of the legislation right now. Shamila Batohi could right now delegate to the Special Investigating Unit the right to prosecute matters that have arisen out of their investigations to recover assets. That could happen right now. They could delegate the power to prosecute deaths as a result of police action, or even just the discharge of a firearm by a police officer where that was not appropriate, to the Independent Policing Investigative Directorate who investigates those. At the moment, there's a convoluted process where things are referred to and fro. So the SIU will recover funds, uncover that there is a crime, refer that to the NPA. The NPA will then have to investigate all over again and then only act afterwards. Why not just allow the SIU to prosecute, as is currently possible in terms of the law? This does happen when it comes to the South African Revenue Service. The prosecuting authority does delegate the power to prosecute. And I think the prosecuting authority has to become a bit braver in sharing the burden of prosecuting this avalanche of, as you call it, white-collar crime and other crimes that we are experiencing. At the same time, there has to be engagement with the courts. The courts are not operating efficiently. They are entertaining Stalingrad strategies when they should not be. They are sitting for, on average, 3 hours a day when it should be 4.5 hours a day. There are too many postponements. That absolutely has to be addressed as a matter of urgency. And this is all going to be on the plate of the next national director.
Dr. Redpath, absolute pleasure having you on. Thank you so much for joining us on News in Focus on Hilaal TV.
Thanks.
That's Dr. Jean Redpath, a senior researcher at the Dullah Omar Institute. That's all we have for you on News in Focus. If you have missed today's episode, you'll be able to find it on our YouTube channel. From myself, Faraz Patel, and the rest of the team in Johannesburg, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.